to order. Oh wait, we're gonna do you first.
I'll do my little pre-blurb and then.
Okay, pre-thing.
Hi.
Oh, you're here.
Okay, he's here. Okay. I just sent you
Tuwa.
Okay, I wasn't sure for the second one. I knew the first you were going to be out, but all right, we can hit it. Let's hit it.
Okay.
If my screen continues to flicker, I may leave and then hop back on. I'll figure out what's going on.
It's flickering still.
Okay. All right.
It may just be your background too. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, let me see if I could change that.
That might be extra data. Sometimes it makes it.
Yeah, right.
So go ahead. I'm going to start and you can just
go ahead.
Okay.
All yours.
Or she could be moving into a parallel dimension.
Yeah, in or out. Okay. So good evening and welcome to our regular
Bienvenidos.
Tuesday, September 27th.
So I'm sorry, Francisco, you can stop for now. Can you hear me, Francisco?
Oh, yes, I can.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
You don't need to interpret right now. Thank you.
Sorry, he doesn't usually have this probably at City Council. We're just going to do like a preliminary little intro, and then once we do the official entry of the meeting, then I will go ahead and let him speak, and then and then we will turn on the interpretation, so we won't have an interruption. So just to let you know, we're learning this whole Spanish translation on our meetings currently. It's new to all of us. So here we go. All right, so good evening and welcome to our regularly scheduled Tuesday, September 27th meeting of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission. We just have a few items to go over before we officially start this meeting this evening. The meeting is live on Comcast Local Channel 27 and on the Pacific Coast TV's website. If any community members that are in attendance this evening would like to speak, they're welcome to, and we'll have the opportunity to at a specific time. Just a review for the attendees, the Planning Commission chair will open and allow a general public comment period prior to the specific items on the agenda. Then the chair will allow for public comment on specific items listed on the agenda as well. During that time, those that want to speak, if you could please raise your virtual icon hand, we will allow each person to speak as they raise their hand. If you are dialing in by telephone only, please push *6 to mute and unmute your hand or mute your speaker. And then to *9 to raise and unraise your hand. Otherwise, your computer, tablet, iPhone, etc. will have icon features that you can press. 3 minutes will be given to each of the commenters during that period of time, and a timer will show up on the screen. Right now, I think there may have been a public comment that was submitted, a general public comment. I'm sure that will get discussed during the meeting, as I do not have any of that information at the time. And so I will then let you all know as well that we do have Spanish translation provided for this meeting this evening. I thank you for your patience as we continue to do remote meetings. And I will now hand this over to Chair Gorn to officially start.
Thanks, Bridget. So I'm happy to open this September 27th meeting of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, guys. So, Bridget, need a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Gossett.
She is here, but she's
having technical.
Here.
Commissioner Reddick.
I'm here.
Commissioner Benjamin.
All here.
Chair Hernandez.
I am.
Sorry, Vice Chair Hernandez.
I am present.
And Chair Gorn.
I'm here.
All commissioners are present this evening.
Okay. So first up is our approval of minutes. Which one was that? Was that
August 26th?
Yeah. So do we have any
August 23rd.
comments, questions on the August 23rd meeting? Thank you. And seeing none, do we have a motion to approve it? I see none. Yeah.
Move we approve those minutes.
Thank you.
I will second that.
So Commissioner Gossett.
Sounds good. Roll call.
Commissioner Gossett,
Yes.
Commissioner Reddick,
Yes.
Commissioner Benjamin,
Oh, yes.
Vice Chair Hernandez,
Aye.
and Chair Gorn.
Yes, please.
Motion to move minutes is approved.
So we've come to the point where members of the public are invited to comment on anything that is not on the agenda, that's not a housing element issue. If anyone has a comment, can you raise your hand out in the audience and let us know that you want to speak? I'm not seeing anyone.
I'm not either. There's no one.
Okay. So we are never open, so I don't have to close. So we can open our first agenda item. Jill, is that going to be you or is that going to be Mike? Mike? So our first agenda item is on the housing element, our first and only item. This is informational, not for a vote. Mike, you can present, please.
Thank you, Chair Gorn, and good evening, Planning Commissioners. Mike Noche, Housing Coordinator for the city. Happy to be here, and I'm going to share my screen. One moment. And we have a presentation prepared for you this evening, and you should be able to see the presentation now. Great. So this evening, we're providing housing updates generally related to the housing element. This housing element cycle is cycle 6. And also what we're going to focus on as part of cycle 6 is the regional housing needs allocation, also referred to as RHNA. I'll also go into more detail about a requirement that the city is we intend to provide as part of our RHNA numbers, which is the realistic capacity buffer, and I'll go into more detail on that buffer. We also want to be mindful of our Measure D capacity, and that is something staff is analyzing as we go through the RHNA allocation and our draft projections for Measure D. We'll also provide some updates on sites, pipeline projects, ADUs, as well as key vacant and non-vacant sites. So I wanted to start things off as just a quick refresher of the San Mateo County income limits, and also, provide this information for folks who might be listening in. There's often a common misconception of what qualifies as low income. San Mateo County has some of the highest area median incomes throughout the entire state. The area median income for a family of 4 is $166,000 a year. What qualifies as low income, as you see in the top border there, is $93,200 to $149,100 per year. So within that range, for a family of 4 would qualify as low income in San Mateo County. These numbers are adjusted annually by the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state level. And then basically every county throughout the entire state has numbers specific to each county. And these are the numbers for San Mateo County, which Half Moon Bay is a part of. I've also included the maximum rent. So these are basic calculations off of essentially 30% of a household's income. And that's for a specific size, and happy to go into detail on how those are calculated. Probably best saved for another meeting, but just wanted to provide some insight for what affordable rents typically are set at within inclusionary programs, as well as 100% affordable projects. These are the maximums. I just want to provide that insight as well. That would be inclusive of not just rent, but also utilities. Certain state guidelines require certain programs, depending on the funding, to actually be set at a lower percentage within the income range. So, for example, 80% AMI, you have basically from 50 to 80% is your low income category. And within certain state programs, you would be setting the rent at 60% AMI. These are set at the maximum that are shown here. But I just wanted to provide a little bit of detail on the income categories as we move forward into the RENA allocation. So the RENA allocation, so for cycle 5, which was our current cycle, which started in 2015, the city was required to produce a total of 240 units. Where we are within that is part of the annual progress report, which is not being presented on this evening. We're focusing on cycle 6, but happy to recap on that as well at a future meeting. For cycle 6, as you can see, our allocation of housing needing to be built has doubled. We are also seeing in this upcoming cycle that HCD is requiring a higher number of very low and low income units. So you'll see the 181 as well as 104 for very low and low income. The 20% buffer, which I'm going to go into more detail on, that is also something that the city's required to do. I'll go into more detail on why. So that line there is with that 20% buffer, which brings us up to planning for at least 576 units. So the realistic capacity buffer, as I've mentioned, HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, they require each jurisdiction to do this analysis, which essentially is the number of units that are likely to be developed on each site. And I'll go into more detail on the constraints that are potentially identified for sites. HCD makes an assumption that the city and all jurisdictions throughout the state, although we're identifying sites, we will not be able to develop as much as we're laying out. Therefore, we have to overestimate essentially, and gives ourselves a buffer to reach this realistic capacity, because the state expects certain sites to either not meet their total potential on the max density, or in some cases not be developed at all for certain types of constraints. I also, before continuing, want to give the just a side note that all of this analysis will be provided when the city staff releases the housing element draft, which we're expecting to release in the coming months. But we wanted to provide you with this preview, essentially. So again, just to kind of highlight more of HCD's findings, there's obviously a significant need for housing to be produced at all affordability income levels. The majority of jurisdictions, and this is where HCD believes that there's a scarcity of land with adequate zoning capacity to meet the current needs, and thus why most cities are feeling the pressure with regards to the higher RENA numbers for this cycle. And then also just highlighting that cities and jurisdictions are also required to focus on high resource areas as being preferred areas for development of housing. So I don't want to get too lost in the weeds, and I know there's a lot of information on this page, so I apologize for that. And if anyone needs to zoom in, I know on Zoom, I believe if you hover your mouse over the top center of the screen, I believe there's like a zoom function to zoom in if anyone needs the text to be a little bit bigger. That being said, these are the adjustment factors that HCD requires cities to take into account when we're essentially figuring out what the realistic capacity is for sites. So basically our contracted the cities, we have contractors that are helping us develop our housing element. They're also assisting staff with this analysis. I don't have details on each site to provide. That will be included in the housing element draft. However, I did want to provide some insight on the criteria. As you can see, those categories that'll be involved in finding the realistic capacity would be taking a look at the zoning, affordability, infrastructure, environmental, and as well as non-residential and non-vacant sites. So all adjustments that are being made. So we have a site acreage, a max dwelling units per acre in the calculation here, and then your adjustment factors. Most of the adjustment factors will decrease the amount of density that is allowed on a site. Typically is what that breaks down to where we get to our realistic capacity. And I can come back to this slide as well if needed. I'm going to hand things over to Jill for the Measure D allocation and just providing some insight on these projections.
Thank you, Mike. I do just want to clarify something. The realistic capacity isn't necessarily what would end up being allowed on the site if that's what's presented in the housing element. It's more in terms of entitling it. It's what HCD might allow the city to claim as being the ability of the site to support RENA. They might not let us, for example, use the maximum density that's allowed in a particular zone district based on those adjustment factors that might present. And so there's a difference between who's allowing what for different reasons there. So in your staff report, we included this projection for Measure D for the cycle 6 period. So this is 8 years worth of Measure D. This is similar to your cycle 5 housing element. It has 8 years of projections for that time frame. In this adjustment was made to take in the new census data and so true it up to the 2020 census and the persons per household, which has actually gone down since 2010. And then I ran it in 3 different scenarios. This is assuming that we issue 50 building permits a year for housing, so 50 units worth. In past years, it was quite a bit lower. And so also I did a scenario at 20. And then just to max it out, we also ran a scenario at 70, which would be basically all of the capacity per year to get a range. And so this at 50, we got to 586 allocations. You can see the population growth, and we assume the 0.5% bonus for the downtown area. And we assume this because City Council's approved this every year since Measure D has been codified. And it is at their discretion that they have always supported it, and we assume that they will continue to do so because that is really aligned with focusing development in the town center. Next slide. So the range based on those 2 scenarios is about 570 to 600 allocations to support that many units. So there's theoretically enough potential allocations available to support the 480 unit RENA as well as RENA with the 20% buffer. Now, that's that's just in the big round number perspective. And we do want to note a few things about constraint of Measure D and some work that we're really having to toil over to make sure that our sites are going to be well received, basically by HCB, which is that some of our very best sites, which are supporting the more affordable units, those that are affordable to very low and low income households, are a little bit larger. And in fact, there's even a site outside of downtown, the school district site at Hatch, where we could see 60 units there from the land use plan. And that would consume basically 3 years worth of arena for outside of downtown. So we want to acknowledge out of all the constraints that we're analyzing, and there's going to be a very large chapter in your housing element on constraints that I've been writing. And the two biggest areas that struggle are water supply and Measure D. And Measure D, we've received feedback from developers and property owners of some of these sites that we're moving forward with and expressing their concerns. So one of the things we're looking at is how to manage phasing these different projects. And you'll see as we get into the sites list some of the kinds of juggling that we're trying to think through. But as you know, in the last couple of years, we've needed to come to you to confirm rankings because we haven't had enough allocations outside of downtown, in particular for accessory dwelling units. And you're going to see how that actually has a real benefit in terms of what we're going to be presenting to HCB in the housing element in terms of how they do address our RENA requirements. But if you have questions on how Measure D is relating to this, we will have time at the end. But just keep this in mind that it's somewhere between 570 and 600 allocations. So right there at that capacity for the bucket. Thanks, Mike. I think you're next.
Thank you, Jill. All right, so we'll get into our sites. Also wanted to highlight, so in past presentations, we've essentially organized things under the city's land use designations, such as the town center, the farm worker, WHO stands for the workforce housing overlay, planned use developments, mobile home parks, as well as publicly owned parcels, HCD, and how the housing element will be organized. We'll have 3 categories typically is what you'll see throughout the document, where basically all of the land use designations are included in some of these sections, which include the pipeline projects, accessory dwelling units, as well as key vacant and non-vacant sites. A few of the pipeline projects that we wanted to highlight for you. As you all know, 555 Kelly Avenue, which is a city-owned that's a single family parcel, is being presented as a combined site with the Ted Adcock Community Center parking lot for a larger site, roughly 1,700 square feet, for the development of affordable housing. The city released an RFQ back in February of 2022 and received 1 application from Mercy Housing and a loss. And that proposal is for 40 units of farm worker housing, 100% affordable. It'll include the resource center and community space. In July, staff went to the city council for approval of a resolution for staff to engage with Mercy Housing, specifically to develop a exclusive negotiations agreement. That agreement is tentatively scheduled for next week's city council meeting on October 4th. It'll also be joined by the city's declaration of the site. So that's the parking lot and the single family home at 555 Kelly. So the entire project site being declared as exempt surplus, and that's a California state requirement, state law, that the city has to declare the site. If it's being used for affordable housing, the city's able to essentially declare it as exempt surplus. If the city had other property that it was essentially trying to sell, it would have to go through a pretty rigorous process of releasing a notice. I believe it's a 60-day notice for potential proposals for affordable housing. So pretty much all public land throughout California has to go through that process now. And that's the Surplus Lands Act specifically. So I went off a little extra detail there on that site, but I wanted to provide that for you all. The Hilltop Mobile Home Park also being highlighted. We have I believe a preliminary application for 32 mobile homes. It's an expansion of the existing mobile home park, and it has been issued its Measure D allocation already. The Podesta plan development, the city has also received a preliminary application for, subject to change, but roughly what we're working into our plans is potentially 150 to 200 units on that site, and a percentage would be subject to the inclusionary affordable housing requirements that the city has as well. So all in all, we're expecting throughout our pipeline roughly 300 units. So getting into accessory dwelling units and how HCD expects jurisdictions to calculate how many ADUs are expected throughout the cycle 6. So that 8-year period. So as far as what's been produced over the last 3 years, 10 ADUs each in 2019 and 2020, 22 ADUs in 2021. So that's pretty much an average of 14 ADUs per year. We were able to multiply that by 8 years for 112 total ADUs is what's expected. Our 2022 numbers are not final yet, so but we expect the average not to change too much. So that being said, HCD does allow us to split the affordability. Generally, ADUs are either of different size, different areas of the city. If they are rented out, they're generally what is considered naturally affordable, just because the unit size is much smaller than, say, what a single family home would be rented for. So therefore, HCD allows cities to build in some assumptions on the affordability levels. So as you can see there, 34 units at very low, and moderate, and 10 units at above, for that grand total of 112 is what our estimates and projections are for ADUs. Now, the key and non-vacant sites, we've provided essentially our list of what's these are potentially developable sites. Some the city's been contacted by the landowner as being interested, and the city's working with any landowner that hasn't necessarily didn't contact the city first, but the city has outlined it as a potential site and is working with landowners that might be interested. So here is the list of key vacant and non-vacant sites, a total of 360 to 420 units. We also have the zoning and what would be potentially required as the rezoning. The zoning that you're seeing here in the far right column aligns with the land use plan as well that was approved by City Council and the Coastal Commission. I'm going to hand it off to Jill just to provide a little extra detail on some of the specifics here, but I just wanted to provide a quick overview before I handed it off.
That's perfect, Mike. Thank you. Just to highlight that all of these sites have been presented to you previously. They are all consistent with the land use plan, with the exception of the 880 Stone Pine Road site, which we did not anticipate during the land use plan update process to include with the workforce housing overlays. So in moving that one forward, that would be an addition of the overlay to that property. Otherwise, the properties already have the zoning that they need, or they were intended to be rezoned according to the land use plan, and those zoning designations are actually in the back of the land use plan in one of the appendices. So we are, you see that range there, and the range is because we're doing our own build-out analysis on each one. I'm looking at it as a planner. One of our consultants is looking at it as from the economic perspective. All of us have to look at it through the lens that ABAG has presented to us with those affordability factors, and also looking at applications and developer interest, property owner interest to see what really fits. For the most part, the city's strategy here is to bring forward vacant sites that are in the town center to the extent feasible. And this is a really different approach than your cycle 5 housing element. The cycle 5 housing element dependent on little infill onesie twosie lots all over town, and they really, you know, a lot of them have developed. None of them have developed as affordable housing. The cycle 5 housing element included a larger site in the very high fire hazard area with 60 units assigned to it, which is a fifth of the cycle 5 arena. And of course, that shouldn't be developed like that. None of these sites have that kind of condition. None of these have hazards like that. All of these either don't have biological resources, or the biological resources are manageable. You will note that we removed the Lutheran Church site. We have believe that we can get to our numbers without it, and we're still working through some biological resource evaluation needs on that one. So it just it doesn't need to be included at this phase of the housing element. So we've really tried to hone this down and focus it on the best sites possible. And we're interested, as we get to the end of this discussion, in any cautions you may have, concerns, observations that you've made about these properties, or if you've noticed other sites that you think we may have overlooked. We've looked at a lot of other properties that aren't on that slide, and so we can hopefully speak to those if they come up. We do have some discussion points for tonight, and remembering the arena at 480 with the buffer really making a big bump up. We need to highlight the this challenge of the distribution of our arena units this cycle, which is heavily weighted to the low and very low categories. You can see it's well over half the units. And so if you were keeping track on the last 3 slides and got to the number of 800 units for those sites, why did we come up with an inventory with 800 when the even with the 20% buffer, we didn't even need 600? And what about Measure D? And I'll speak to that, but I'd like Mike to talk a little bit about why we had to go over, and it's about the distribution of affordability.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, and to that point, what HCD is expecting is for most of the sites that we're going to be presenting, we're also working with our consultants to produce a summary of each site, which will go into detail on what the constraints are at the site, what is potentially possible. What we've seen from other cities and most Southern California cities have already gone through their cycle 6, and many are still going through the kind of back and forth on having their housing element cycle. So we've been able to learn from other jurisdictions going through the process previously. But what we've learned is that HCD will kind of pick away, so to speak, at what the realistic capacity, and that's why we've included some of the slides on realistic capacity, because we expect some of the sites to potentially drop off due to certain constraints. So just like Jill had mentioned, the Lutheran church site, although it was originally potentially going to be included in our total, due to some of the constraints there, it could still be used as a backup site potentially, but for the time being, we're doing okay in our inventory. That being said, from what we've learned from other jurisdictions, in summary, it is best to provide that buffer in advance, especially on your first round draft that will go to HCD for their feedback. That being said, I know Jill had mentioned Measure D, but definitely welcome comments and concerns about any of the sites or potentially a site that you may not have seen on the list. I do have backup slides as well if a visual is needed on some of the sites as well. I can pull that up as well. So that's the end of our presentation, but happy to answer questions.
Well, I have a lot of questions. Can we take this to public comment first? So we only have a couple of attendees, and I think this is going to take a little while to talk over. I would like to open public comment. So Bridget, if any attendees would like to speak, can you raise your hand? I see a couple.
Sure. We'll start with Mike Ferreira.
Thank you.
Sure. Go ahead, Mike.
You're up.
You can unmute.
Thank you, Chair Gorn, staff, and commissioners. I was active in the campaign that passed Measure D. And it was very clear to the voters at that time that they were voting for 1% with a 0.5% optional in the downtown at the option of the council. And the citizens haven't voted for anything else. So what I'm not understanding is how whoever did RENA, and that's always murky, whether it's ABAG or HCD or whatever, how they reached into the discretionary part and made that mandatory. 1% is 1%. 480 exceeds 1%. And that's what I'm referring to. And I'm still trying to figure all that out as to how they legally came up with the 480. I see a lot of things here, and I agree with a lot of the site analysis. I think there's probably many other sites that could be deployed, if that's the right word, over the next 8 years. But nonetheless, I'm sorry if I'm stuck in the past, but I still cannot get the legality of the 480 number. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all I have.
Yeah, there's no one else has their hand raised. I'm going to close public comment, and we can open it to to commissioners. Can we start with Vice Chair Hernandez? You had your hand up first, please.
Yeah, so I'm curious what's being used as a calculation for the baseline. Is it the 1% or the 1.5%? Given the historical pattern of development, we've averaged somewhere around a little over 1%. So just echoing the same comments from former Mayor Mike Farrar. Second point is there are lots that seem like they'd be good candidates for this, including Beechwood, which has many developable portions of the property that are not compromised by potential ISHA. So I'm curious why a city-owned property like that isn't showing up on a list like this when it seems like a very good candidate, and we should be having conversations about that. The third question is more fundamental, which is for people following at home, so what? I have a requirement to have a certain amount of housing stock, big picture, which we satisfy. But there's this very low income, and affordable housing brackets, which looks like there's a very big number in there versus the last cycle. What's the so what from a city perspective? Are we going to go to property owners and say, I'm sorry, you can't develop because your housing, which is targeted for people who are making, households making $400,000 a year, doesn't fit into the requirements or the obligations we may have to the county or to the state of California. So I'm trying to get to the so what here. It's like, what is the implication to us as a planning body? Why do these numbers matter? And I don't need the 4-hour dissertation, just more of the explanation so the folks at home can understand the impact of this change. Because it seems like there's a 4x change in the amount of affordable housing that needs to be provided. And somebody's lunch is going to get eaten as a result of it. And I want to know, is the city going to do that? Or is it property owners who are going to have their lunch eaten? Because in the 8 years I've been in this body, I think I've seen 3 affordable housing projects. So I don't see, outside of what the city's doing, I don't see private industry coming forward with anything other than the occasional ADU or, a spiff because I'm building 20 units of housing by Purisima Creek. So help me understand that, please.
Yeah, so if it's okay with other commissioners, it'd be really great. Maybe we can move to staff because those 2 questions seem to be really core questions.
I'm going to have some spin on that.
Yeah.
So, let's not take this as a definitive answer before the rest of us have spoken.
No, I understand. No, we're not. Okay, thank you.
So why don't we kick off just a context portion of the answer, and I can do a little bit of that, and then we'll let this develop and save Mike's depth on it for the rest of it. I'll note that our Cycle 5 arena of 240 units, of that, the city has now reported, and we're at the end of that 8-year cycle. We've had 131 units receive building permits. We still have 133 to go because we were not building in the very low and low categories. And so the city received, and others did, we aren't the only one, cities that underperformed in their very low and low income affordability levels with their production during Cycle 5, and then dependent upon the demographics of the jurisdiction. And ours has some very low, extremely low, and acutely low income households. We received what they called an equity adjustment. And so our RENA, like almost all the other jurisdictions in San Mateo County, ours doubled. Most of the other jurisdictions tripled. Ours was moderated probably because of Measure D. But in addition to that doubling, we had that shift, which moved those units down into those deeper income categories. I want to say one more context thing. Just because a site is a housing element site doesn't mean it's going to develop during the housing element cycle, or maybe not ever. We are setting the table and we're showing that this is possible. And there are other sites that may develop during this period, and they can all count. So we're just trying to focus though on the ones that are most likely to develop and that have the highest potential for providing more deep affordability.
And the 1% as a baseline. Is that our baseline?
Yeah, we don't know. I believe that they looked at our Measure D and our history of Measure D, and as I noted, the City Council has approved the 0.5% bonus for downtown since 2009 when Measure D was on the books. So I don't know specifically. ABAG does this work in response to who actually figures this out for individual jurisdictions. The arena is filtered down to the COGS. So ABAG received our arena numbers for the 9-county area, and then that gets broken up by county, and then from there it gets broken into individual jurisdictions.
So,
through the chair,
if I'm understanding, I just need to understand. So, the Measure D, the sort of the higher number, the 20% buffer, is not so much. We're just adding numbers in case the approved projects don't meet certain requirements, right? That they end up lower than expected for various reasons.
Yeah, they want to see that a jurisdiction has enough sites with zoning that it could accommodate the arena plus the 20% buffer.
Right. So it's not adding on development. It's just saying that if the other development doesn't meet standards, then there's a backup. Is that the idea? Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Vice Chair Hernandez, you want to follow up?
Yeah, just thank you. Great presentation. I appreciate everything you've just said. Going back to, I have the same question that former Mayor Ferrer has, which is, I still don't get the math. So I would appreciate, maybe not during this meeting, but a spreadsheet with some math that says, look, if we're going to be called underperforming as a city, I need to understand the math that says we're underperforming, because if the number is 1% and I produce, doing some math on the fly, I'm not as good as Jimmy as this. If I produce 75 units of housing, then I'm underperforming by 25 with 1%. And if it's 1.5%, I'm underperforming by 75 units of housing. And so, like, at some point, there's a stick that comes with the state of California. They're going to punish us, or they're going to make us do things. And I just want to understand the math that's being used to establish that we're underperforming, so that as a community, yes, I support affordable housing, but I don't want us to have to support an obligation that's based on math that doesn't conform with the other rules of the city. So I would just like to see something as a mathematical formula. And I would love my fellow Commissioner Benjamin to look at that with his fancy PhD degree from Stanford University in applied mathematics, because I'm sure he can get to the root of the matter, right? I just want to make sure that the basis we're using makes sense. That's the question I have.
So, Commissioner Benjamin, we should have started with you.
No. You start with me often enough. It's great to bat second, because I I share some of the concerns that Rick raised. I think I have to start somewhere back a little further though, because the presentation does a nice job of elucidating the numbers, right? And there's a spreadsheet, but there's a step before that where we get the model that produced the numbers that we're aiming for. And I understand that ABAG gave us those numbers, and ABAG got its allocation from the state. And I understand that, and I appreciated Jill's observation that some communities actually saw tripled allocations. But I don't have clarity on the model for deciding how they got their number. I think that's where Rick and we haven't talked about this. So, I think we share some confusion about that. And I think so it's not to say it's wrong. This is not me saying talk to the hand or anything like that. But my perception from the comment about us sort of maybe underperforming in cycle 5 as far as how many units have actually been produced as opposed to the goal. And I realize that we're about defining feasibility rather than actually dropping the hammer and saying you will produce these many units. They actually will happen. But I do think that if there's a challenge here, it's because we have accommodated market rate housing. And we've communicated to our development community, our investor community, that when market rate housing comes to us, if it conforms with the LCP, we're likely to say okay, because we haven't been thinking, we need, the HCD says we got to have more affordable housing. And the question, and I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but I think it's something that we need to understand as a commission and factor into the expectations we set with our development community, is the extent to which the state has authorized us to reject applications for development, which would conform if the cumulative impact of the approach we're taking would be to fail to achieve our below market rate housing goals in each of the categories. So this is not me raising my hands and, saying the sky is falling for anyone, but it's really important for us to have a clear view about the practical ramification of these numbers, where they came from. And I'm just going to be unfairly harsh, okay? So this is not what I really think happened. And just say someone said, darn it, Half Moon Bay needs to produce this much housing because, it's this much square footage, or it's in the Bay Area and some rule of thumb, some rubric that was used, and a number just popped out of an orifice. And that it may be that that's a really good number, or it could be that that's not such a great number. And it could be that it doesn't matter. It is what it is. ABAG gave it to us and we have to live with it. But if it's really a legal requirement that we're going to be held accountable for, then we better know exactly what our authority is to make land use decisions that might limit our ability to achieve it. And that might include saying no to development that we think might otherwise be fine. I've been doing this for 16 years almost. I'm not clear, and I realize the ground is shifting in the last few years as the housing advocate community in the state has developed, held increasing sway. And so this is me trying to maintain my footing, and perhaps other commissioners can see it the way I do, that their footing is not clear either, so that we are making wise decisions about how to begin with the end of achieving affordability distribution in mind. So that's the additional spin I wanted to put on Rick's comment. Of course, starting with the spreadsheet and knowing that there's, I appreciated the formula that Mike presented on the second or third slide that sort of said, we start with this many units and we shave off some because of this kind of constraint or that kind of constraint. And I will just speak to Rick's observation about just Beechwood as an example he pulled up. It is true that it has some environmental constraints. It may have more than are well understood. It also may have value for managing hazards that may not have gone into the calculations that he was considering, because he only mentioned habitat issues. So I think that there are a variety of reasons why the actual numbers will get whittled down. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm not going to comment on the Lutheran Church site. It's an interesting case, but I want to understand more clearly my ability to comment. I think that this is a general plan matter, but I need to spend some quality time with Winter to be clear on how I can think about that publicly, since it's not too far from where I live. There was a set of observations about, you know what, maybe I'll stop here and let staff reply to those thoughts and not try to just fill the bowl. So we
can get back to you.
Thank you.
Because there's a lot there. So I know, Winter, you want to comment? Is that right? Can we start?
Thanks through the chair. I thought I would just lay out some kind of legal responses to some of these questions about consequences and the I think, the process for doing this housing element update, which does happen every 8 years. And it's the same process that's followed, as Jill explained, with HCD coming up with the grand total numbers for each region, telling the Association of Bay Area Governments and the other COGs how many each kind of region is going to have to plan for. And then, and I'm sure staff and we can pull together information about what that process is, but long and short of it is it's over for this cycle. And we got our numbers back in 2021. And I think everyone was anticipating, and as far as I know, every single jurisdiction has received a significant increase in their RHNA numbers this cycle, primarily because there has been a tremendous push for development of more housing all across the state. So that was not unexpected. And Half Moon Bay has not been called out or provided with any especially large increase. I know a lot of jurisdictions have had really big increases. So that number kind of is what it is, as Commissioner Benjamin put it. And now the task for the city is to plan for that number. There is not an obligation on the city to produce that number of housing units in 8 years. The typical consequence for failing to actually permit and get constructed your RHNA number for jurisdictions outside the coastal zone, if you don't make significant progress towards those numbers, you get on what I affectionately call the naughty list for SB 35, which is a CEQA streamlining statute, and you are subject to certain streamlining rules for approving housing development projects in the future. That SB 35 doesn't apply to Half Moon Bay because it's in the coastal zone. Now, of course, as Vice Chair Hernandez pointed out, this law is continually changing. We get a lot of housing bills each year. So it's not like inconceivable that Half Moon Bay, that the coastal zone will sort of remain sacrosanct as it has so far in these this housing legislation. There could be changes, but for now, the consequences are fairly limited in Half Moon Bay because it is in the coastal zone for not actually producing the number of units. And really this, to put it in context, the requirement to plan for this number of housing units is really one piece of a big puzzle that the state is doing with respect to housing. And the goal here, I think, is to really force jurisdictions to allow for in their zoning, make zoning code amendments to allow for residential development at greater densities than they have in the past. And with greater densities also comes more affordability. So, when you have to plan for a certain number of units, you have to show HCD the steps you're taking, the programs you're going to adopt in order to allow for and accommodate this number of housing units. And that planning itself can have the effect of, increasing housing production by basically forcing local governments to allow higher numbers. Even if those numbers don't actually come to fruition, that's kind of the goal of this particular legislation and requirement.
So, Commissioner Ruddick, we'll get to you in just a second. I just wanted to check in and see if that answered Vice Chair Hernandez's question and Commissioner Benjamin's question.
I wanted to just, one of the things, I appreciate, the answer was helpful, yes. I want to look squarely at the premise that increasing the number will result in more affordable numbers. Because I think that in the Bay Area, short of the ADUs, I've seen some really modest homes that probably are not anywhere near the moderate level in the slide set that we saw. So I'm not saying that that's not appealing logic, of course it is, but is it realistic? If we make those assumptions, it isn't. It sounds like bad things won't happen to us if we've shown good faith, but if we really want to do the right thing, when we made some hard decisions on the LCP about, for example, shoreline protection that were, I think, pretty hard for some of our residents to swallow. And, if we're really trying to pull, to achieve objectives that the state is saying are important, what is our flexibility to say no to projects that would be compatible with our general plan, except that when we look at it, it really restricts our ability to achieve our below market rate housing goals. And I know that's the wrong word. I just didn't have it on the tip of my tongue. The acutely low income, or achieving these objectives will be limited by a death of 1,000 cuts if we don't have the authority to say no to them, unless staff can pull a remarkable rabbit out of its hat to achieve those results in those categories. My thought.
Okay. And Jill, you had something you wanted to say?
I think Mike does as well, but I think Mike, could you put our list back up of the key vacant and non-vacant sites?
Yes.
It's important for us to reground in this list. This is not an exotic list. These are all sites.
Right.
They are all land use plan consistent, with the exception of needing to add that workforce housing overlay to one of them.
Sorry.
The strategy represented those first two sites, 880 Stone Pine and then the school district site, in addition to 555 Kelly, which we have on our pipeline project list. Those three sites are publicly owned and are where the lion's share of the very low and low affordable units will come. The rest of the sites may, if they're privately owned and developed, you'll be getting affordable units through your below market rate ordinance, which is already on the books. And so this is why having public sites is just really important. We don't have very many. We need to make the most of them. And I'll stop there and see if Mike has any other responses to some of the discussion.
No, just wanted to add, just second Winter's interpretation of what the consequences are, because I know some of the questions were surrounding that. So I think what we're providing in the sites is to essentially keep us off of potential, future naughty lists or what might transpire at the state level. I think the other part in the more near term, aside from potential consequences for cities that are in the coastal zone, is just ensuring that HCD does in fact certify our housing element. I think they're and Winter can correct me if I'm wrong. I think there could be implications for cities that do not have a certified housing element on the books after a certain date, and kind of after potential rounds of review and whatnot. I know there's potential implications at a site in Southern California that I don't have the details, and I don't necessarily want to share that right now. But I think that is the other portion is finding that balance of what HCD is asking us to produce or at least outline, essentially.
Okay, thank you. We have pretty much everybody's hand up. I want to get to Commissioner Ruddick, but can we just do Vice Chair Hernandez quickly? I want to make sure.
Yeah, I just want to follow up because you asked me the direct question. So my takeaway is we're going through a process because we live in the state of California to do a regional housing needs assessment. It's required as part of our, oh gosh, I just forgot the term, our certified housing plan, which there's an official term for that, which is problematic for us as a community if it's not approved. So we need to go through this process. In the immediate term, there's no, other than we look bad, and potentially our plan could be rejected by ACD, there's no immediate short-term impact to us not meeting this obligation. Longer term, housing law changes, we could be held to account, and also, it's a measure of saying, are we meeting the needs of the people who are most needy in our community and with our housing stock? That's what I heard, is that is what this law serves. There's no immediate stick. There might be one down the road, but it's more of a measure of transparency and accountability, and it's a requirement as we go through our normal planning processes. Is that fair?
Yeah, that sounds accurate to me. That's, I mean, the stick is probably going to hit the people whose housing stock was tripled first, or who are out of the zone.
Winter didn't object vociferously, so I will.
No, and I did just want to second Mike's point about the consequence of not getting your housing element certified. We definitely want that to happen. Otherwise, there could be lawsuits, there could be impacts on permitting authority and stuff like that. But in terms of the question of what happens if there aren't 576 new housing units built at the end of 8 years, that's where there's not much of a stick at this point anyway, for Half Moon Bay.
Thank you, Winter. Thank you, everybody. I'm done with my questions.
Commissioner Ruddick, thank you for your patience.
Oh, no worries. Maybe Winter just answered my question, but I wanted to follow up specifically on the question that former Mayor Mike Ferreira raised at the beginning of the hearing, excuse me, which is in the course of the planning that we're required to do, if there's conflict between the number that comes down every cycle for us and the local law as embodied in Measure D, what happens?
Brian, would you like me to give that a shot.
It sounds like a winter question.
Yeah. So the state law here, I mean, they're kind of apples and oranges, right? HCD is saying plan for this much, and Measure D is saying you can only issue this many certificates for development, right? And there are exceptions and things like that. And so the way that the two interact, as I see it in this housing element cycle, is HCD is going to look at the numbers that you come up with. Like we're going to, Jill and Mike are going to put together this great spreadsheet, and it's going to say, here are the 11 sites, and here are the number, this is the number of units that could be at each site, and here's the number of ADUs. And HCD is probably going to say, well, you do have this Measure D. Is that going to keep this from being a realistic estimate of how much you can actually develop? And so that, I think, is what staff is faced with in terms of getting a housing element that HCD will approve, is kind of navigating between that, saying, yes, we have this, it's called a constraint on development. We have this constraint on development. Here are all the programs we're going to do in order to achieve our RHNA allocation, notwithstanding that. I mean, just as a matter of law, HCD is not bound by any local ordinance. They can give us whatever number we want, and there are mechanisms for objecting and appealing that, which the city did not carry out in this cycle. So that would be the normal process. And I would just say that, looking at this from a statewide level, I think we can all see that if every jurisdiction in the state adopted, measure a limit on growth, and then said to HCD, you can't give us any numbers higher than this because of this limit on growth, that would pretty severely constrain what the state is trying to do in terms of encouraging housing development. So that's not really a particular answer here. I'm just trying to put this in perspective of like how HCD as a state housing development agency looks at this situation. But I think Jill and Mike can talk about how they have balanced the two in what they're working on for the housing element.
We can do that. I do want to acknowledge that when the draft RHNA came out, we did write a letter about it, and we noted the capacity was challenging. We were not yet aware of the equity adjustment that was not included in the draft RHNA, and so we did not comment on that because we did not know that was going to be employed. And so after the comment period, the final RHNA was adopted, and there was a very narrow window to do anything about it. We conferred with the 21 Elements folks who tracked all of the jurisdictions in Southern California and elsewhere who had challenged their RHNA, and whether or not those challenges were successful, and what it took to lodge those challenges, and whether or not there were even negative consequences for having challenged. And we made a decision that it was we were not in a good position to challenge, because we had not produced any low or very low affordable housing units, and furthermore, this was something that City Council was prioritizing for their affordable housing focus, and it would, in my opinion, have been disingenuous for us to say we weren't interested in doing that. So it was difficult, and we went as far as we felt that we could. And I will go back and note that the water constraint is not a little thing either. Measure D is for real locally for us, but the water situation for all of the agencies that are using the Delta water source through the SFPUC. I've been talking to my colleagues about this and how we are all going to have to deal with this in our SUPA documents, and whether or not this is an impact. And it's very interesting. And This is something these very seasoned secret consultants have not had to face before in housing elements. And I just want to assure you that we're working on that. And it's there's a lot of layers here. So I appreciate that the number is concerning. I think we could have done a lot worse, to be real honest with you.
Jill, I had a question. Maybe it's for Mike. I wanted to know about the ADUs. Those do count in RENA numbers, or they don't? They do. So you gave an estimate of the potential ADUs requests. Why is that important? Why is that number important? That estimate?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Chair Gorn, and just sharing that slide here again. So this estimate is definitely vital. So essentially, we are allowed to include ADUs within that RENA total. So this is part of that grand total of 480 units. The breakdown essentially is what HCD allows as far as that affordability breakdown. So that is what it will be plugged into our calculations. So this is all essentially our estimates on what will be produced in the ADU section or sector of development throughout the city.
So I thought that ADUs were sort of that developers were looking at them more closely, and that you were getting sort of more interest in developing ADUs as part of larger projects. So the making an average of the 3 years seems low to me. I would think that it would be actually increasingly higher, but you're the one who knows better. Can you explain?
Sure. No, I don't know. Won't say that I know better, but I would say we have to base it off of what past year's performance has been. We're purposely including starting in 2019 when our ADU ordinances were essentially expanded and we saw an increase in numbers. So it all kind of stems from realistic capacity, essentially, and HCD will challenge any increase that isn't based off of what past performance, or if the city had some type of maybe funding program, that where we could reasonably assume there would be, or at least show proof that there would be a large increase, then we could potentially increase the numbers past what's on the screen here. But our understanding is that HCD would need additional information on that, which this is essentially what we've outlined as what the expected capacity would be for HCD.
I get you, and it can change, and it doesn't matter what the estimate is necessarily. It's just for display, basically. Thank you. Commissioner Gossett. Oh, wait.
Well, we just want to be clear that HCD is only accepting a formula, and we're thrilled that they are accepting this because prior to 2019, we were only doing 3 a year, and we weren't really allowed to count any. So being able to count 112 and take care of almost a quarter of the RENA with these is really a big deal. If 2022 is coming in stronger, we're going to roll it in. But these numbers are the numbers that HCD has already seen in your housing element annual progress reports. So this all has a paper trail way through. So we have to show our math year by year by year, property by property, by parcel number, when applications came in for coastal development permits, how long they took to entitle, how long it took before the building permit was applied for, how long it took to construct, when did they get a certificate of occupancy. So
No, I get it.
this is very,
I just needed it.
I know. And so it is difficult because just like what you're seeing, other cities are frustrated because their trends are going up.
Yeah.
And HCD is not accepting those trend lines. They're just going to take these recent years. So we're still observing our colleague cities who are ahead of us and trying to be as strategic as we can around this, but that's what we've learned so far.
I get it. Yeah, thanks. That is more understandable for me. Thank you. Commissioner Benjamin, we'll get to you in a second. And Commissioner Gossett has your hand up.
Well, thank you. I wanted to say thank you to Mike and Jill for the presentation, and also to the fellow commissioners, because I'm really learning a lot about this process for the housing element plan. And the questions I had were somewhat similar to what was already discussed, beyond like how we got to that number of 576. But you know, you already had listed the constraints of Measure D, water and sewage. And I just wanted to ask a couple questions, and they're probably very tactical. One about 880 Stone Pine. And Jill, are you aware of any news to shore up the dam at Polarcitos Lake? Does that prevent the site from being developed? And then I wanted to ask a question about how public input is going to be weaved into the plan. And that's basically it. I really don't have any other comments. A lot was covered with the fellow commissioners. Thank you.
Jill?
Sorry, I was typing a little too loud and I didn't hear your public comment.
Oh, I just wanted, because I know you had a lot, I don't mean public comment. I think what I meant was public input meetings, because I know you
okay.
around and met with various groups, to seek their input to help you develop your plan.
Yeah, so, we've done a lot of that as we back in July, and we'll continue to have an iterative process with our public input, but most of it has been conducted, and we've tried to do that in lots of different layers. And of course, the county also staged a very significant public outreach effort, which incorporated COSIDE for a portion of that. When we see a need to do more, we go back, and we've also done interviews with service providers for a wide range of agencies who really have their finger on the pulse of the community's needs. So we're happy to review that again with you and get more input, because during this process, once the draft is ready, it will be put out into the public forum for a minimum of 30 days. And we will get public input on the draft, incorporate it into the draft, and then submit it to HCD. So there's even a build-in to that circulation period to make sure the local jurisdictions are folding public input into their housing plan all the way through its development. For 880 Stone Pine, we can dig into that one more, I think, at a future time, but I will tell you that our former city manager, Nisbet, met with folks with that agency and reviewed the condition and the situation around that particular dam and how it's being addressed. And it's actually included in their capital improvement program for upgrading it. And the risk associated with it is much lower than we had understood previously. So that was a really positive outcome from some communication with the other agency.
Commissioner Benjamin, you're muted.
I bet you can hear me better now. Sorry. So I want to be sure that the thrust of the comments don't come off as the community feels stabbed in the back by these numbers. They are a bit of a shock at one level, but not because of some, it's not, these responses about how do we do this are not intended as sharp criticism of staff, at least not for me. And I don't think for other members of the commission or the public that I heard tonight. I do think that they belie a sense that the public's view of what we thought growth was seems to have some pressure against what HCD may feel that our growth, what they would aspire our growth to be. And I appreciate the fact that you, Jill, and Mike are working to harmonize those things. Thank you. Another aspect of harmony that I think is important here was reflected in you had a formula that took you from sort of theoretical to realistic. You don't need to put it back up, but there was an equation in the presentation. And by the way, I would like to have a copy of this presentation. I think I asked for the last one, and if I got it, I apologize. I don't know where it is, but I'd like to have both of them actually. Understanding those things, the way those variables are replaced by values or ranges of values, is in some ways an opportunity to harmonize the housing element with the other elements of the general plan, from my perspective at least. Understanding our safety element, which is kind of out of date, understanding how it fits into our recently certified LCP, and understanding the way that housing allocations for the county that might show up in other coastal areas is pertinent to our ability to say it produces a harmonized general plan. So I am not trying to introduce unwarranted complexity. I am trying to acknowledge required complexity in the way that we approach this project. It sounds to me like the effort to centralize the growth in an area that reduces the amount of traffic is just wonderful in terms of its ability to help us harmonize other elements of the plan with the proposed housing element. And conversely, understanding how the county is planning to use lands that might result in increased traffic in Half Moon Bay or other kinds of impacts with respect to safety or coastal resources is important. In my conversations with Public Works over the years, it has become increasingly clear that in some ways our ability to achieve our goals for the things we aspire to in other elements of our general plan are constrained by what the county does in the areas above us or north of us or south of us. And so grasping that level of understanding so that we know where the hockey pucks that they're skating towards are going to be, we have a better idea about whether what we're proposing, if it's implemented, will be able to harmonize with the other elements of our general plan. So I'm happy to elaborate more on that. But to me, the place where I would watch that happen would be in the way that those variables in that formula in that slide are filled in. To me, that reflects a certain amount of the way those things work. I also think that we are developing a new understanding for the way that the weather is changing. And I'm not sure we had that understanding at the time these other I'm not sure the assumptions that we're making about, for example, the availability of other publicly owned land is still warranted or could be warranted. It doesn't sound to me like those are assumptions that staff is making, but I heard Commissioner Hernandez ask about other publicly owned land. And it would be helpful in elaborating about what we do and don't use to maybe be explicit about what, why we think those lands are or are not important for these purposes. If there's some other purpose we need them for, it's worthwhile to know that. It may be resources, it may be hazards. I don't know what it is. Depends on the land, probably. I think that the last question I have is really about the process going forward, which is and I'm sure that next steps is the next thing we're going to talk about. But at some point, the document draft is coming back. It's going to be subject to some public conversation. I imagine that the public will have some hearings with us, of course. And the ability to draw those links quickly. I think you said 30 days or 60 days. There was some review period. The ability to make those cases so that we can argue as part of the findings that are required for an element of the general plan, that they harmonize, will be valuable. It will pay us in the long run, just like our LCP update benefited from a lot of work early to save a lot of work later. So too will these understandings pay off in the long run. And I think it will help our citizens understand the excellent job that you're doing. Thanks.
Any other comments from other commissioners? Commissioner Ruddock?
Well, I just wanted to briefly repeat a praise I gave to staff a couple of months ago when you all gave us a preview of the affordable housing initiatives. And as I said at the time, it's early innings and it's way too early to celebrate any of those things, but it is heartening and encouraging to me to see the development of such a list of potential sites. And I know how frustrating it's been for staff and city council and everybody involved over the last few years. So I am very encouraged and excited by the possibilities that exist on that list. And I hope we can have the fortitude and the stick-to-itiveness to see several of those come to fruition. So thanks for your efforts to this point.
I wanted to add one other little thing, which is in your framing of this issue going forward, I think it's important to make clear that that 20% buffer that you're talking about doesn't mean exceeding Measure D numbers. So like in the staff report, when you say Measure D allocations may not cover the 20% buffer, that it implies that that building will exceed Measure D allocations, and that's not the case. So it just should be a little more clear. That's all.
You could share. We want to just note a couple more things. Just I think that's what I mean, and we agree with that comment. I thought we hit that in the staff report, but if we didn't, we'll try to put that a little bit more up front. I'm struggling a little bit with some of the reactions to these sites because they are all in the land use plan, and we plan these sites to feed into this housing element and the next one. And so I think I just want to remind and then reminding myself of how we did that. And Mike wasn't here, so I'm going to share a little bit about what we did with that. We prepared two different build-out analysis for the land use plan, one with the 2040 planning horizon, and the other was this maximum theoretical build-out where we looked at the development potential of literally every single lot in Half Moon Bay, and applied different standards to each one based on its what we saw as its carrying capacity for development. And all of these sites are included in the build-out analysis, and were other than that Stone Pine with those workforce housing overlay units, although we planned a significant number of affordable housing density bonus units in the town center that would be applicable to that particular site. And that's why I had build out numbers. These things happen. So I just think it's important for everyone. I mean, this shoe dropped when those build out analyses came out, and we saw big numbers then. And maybe it's a little more real now because maybe it's because there's very specific sites and we're getting more detail. But your staff has already run numbers on each of these multiple times several years ago. So I just don't know if everybody understands what went into the land use plan for that build out. Because when I hear about harmonizing this housing element with the land use plan, this housing element and its sites were born in the land use plan. And I don't know what the gap is, and I'm happy to speak with any of the commissioners after this meeting, so and Mike too, so we can better appreciate what the concerns might be. But honestly, this was the nicest, cleanest little list of vacant and non-vacant sites I've seen. And I hope there's some comfort about that. They're downtown, they're sites they're sites you've thought about. So just catch staff up if you can afterwards if there's something that we've missed in moving these forward.
Just to respond really briefly, I haven't heard that kind of resistance tonight. I thought I heard feedback. Commissioner Benjamin, you have?
Yeah, that was what I was the one who mentioned harmonized. So thank you for the gentle, broad brush, but I heard it, I got it. I'm thinking about the safety element. I'm not thinking about, we've had conversations about resources on some parcels. I think the questions about 1%, 1.5%, Measure D was certified by the Coastal Commission. It's part of our planning document, and it may all be fine. But I think it's incumbent on us to lay out how they fit together. It's not an accusation that they can't fit together. So I hope that helps. To the chair, I want to apologize as a point of order. I have family in Florida, in Sarasota, and Orlando, and Jacksonville. I'm trying to do some help. I'm trying to help them make some decisions, and I need to bail from the meeting tonight. So with your permission, I'm going to sign off, and I apologize to my colleagues and the public. I think I said most of what I said. I'll be happy to elaborate. I hope those last comments are comforting, and I'm happy to, continue the dialogue. It's not to say that there's a trick hiding. There's some smoke and mirrors. Is to say we want to be sure that we have communicated how the pieces fit together, and it's not just the LCP. It's the safety element. It's the circulation element. It's the way the other pieces all fit together. So thank you, and I bid you all an excellent good night.
Good luck.
Good night, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks very much. And Vice Chair Hernandez, do you have any?
Well, I just wanted to respond to Jill's comment. The list of candidate housing sites conforms with my understanding of what's available, readily developable, and manageable. It's not the exhaustive list of everything that could potentially be developed, but it sort of ticks the box of, do we have a realistic ability to meet our regional housing needs assessment? Yes, we do. Here's a candidate, here's a buffer, here's an extra buffer, and we haven't exhausted the list of all the candidates that are available. So I'm not shocked or surprised by what you put together. Thank you.
All righty. So I think we're done with this issue. We don't have a vote on it, so we can move on to director's report, if that's acceptable. Yes, everybody says yes. Jill, you're up.
Great. And thank you, Mike and I both appreciate your input. I know Mike was going to just thank you. I can see that. We have, just by the way, in next steps, we are drafting some of the more chunky chapters of the housing element, and we will vet them or pieces of them with you as we are able to do so. It's quite iterative, and we're really into it. Okay, so you received communication today from a concerned resident about a coastal development permit process in the steps.
Yeah.
Really, this is not on the agenda, but so I will be brief. We appreciate that the Planning Commission maintains the highest standard in overseeing fair and inclusive processes in compliance with the LCP. And to that end, staff remains devoted to the cause in our administrative efforts to fulfill that. We acknowledge this resident's input about this unfortunate situation. I want to reassure the Commission that we are open to talking about that process in the future. Happy to do that.
Thank you. You did wonderful.
So agenda forecast. Your next meeting is October 11th. And I think Scott is trying to get a use permit ready for you. You don't see many of those. It's for a new bar. So that'll be a little different than what we did tonight. We are working on a land use plan cleanup, and that's going to be coming this fall. You're going to see more housing element. We also have a number of projects that are chunking through the Architectural Advisory Committee. Last week, they saw 2800 Champs-Élysées. This is a new home that the Commission has seen twice. It's been fully redesigned. Story poles are up for it now. They were installed as a courtesy, really, for the Architectural Advisory Committee. And of course, they are required before any Planning Commission hearing. We also looked at 63 Guerrero. That's another new house. And that one, it just went really, really well. It doesn't have any exceptions. It's not a visual resource corridor. And so I'll probably take that one at a hearing. The Redondo Beach Road and Highway 1, there's a childcare center down on that corner, Coastside Childcare Center. And they are proposing an expansion. And so the Architectural Advisory Committee did look at a new building for that site. It's a site that has a few challenging conditions. And so Doug Garrison is, your senior planner, he's working on it, and that will be a Planning Commission item at some point. Mike's already told you about October 4th for City Council, when they will see 555 Kelly for the next steps in that process. We need to do our triannual building code update. That will be probably done in November. And then Measure D is always brought before City Council at their first meeting in December. I have an update on the short-term rental ordinance. It's scheduled to go to the Coastal Commission now in hearing on October 14th. So that's a Friday. The staff report is posted. The Commission staff is proposing significant changes from the City Council adopted ordinance. I'm happy to send links to the Planning Commission members if you're interested in following this item. This is a very different staff recommendation than what they previously put forth for that original hearing that got postponed. That was back in May. I do want to reassure you that we are preparing a response. And we would encourage any member of the public, short-term rental operator, anyone who's interested in short-term rentals in Half Moon Bay for whatever reason it is, maybe it's because of housing preservation, to pay attention to this process, participate. It's easy to submit written comments to the Coastal Commission. They're due generally to get them to the commissioners. You want to get them into their system a week before the hearing. So that deadline will be October 7th. And I'm happy to be a contact on this, as is Joe Butcher on our staff. We've been working in sync on this for quite some time. So do you have questions about it after you take a look at the report, or you want to just call and chat? Let me know. And that's my update tonight. Thanks. And I missed you guys. So nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, Jill, you were talking about the October 11th agenda, and something went haywire with my audio at that moment. Could you say again?
Sure. So the Planning Commission's next meeting is October 11th. We're probably going to have a use permit on your packet. It's for a new bar on Main Street, located where the Arc restaurant used to be. And Scott is the project planner, and we've got quite a few other things hopping around. And as soon as we can line them up with proper public notice and they're really ready for you, we'll be bringing them forward.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Vice Chair Hernandez, your hand is up. Do you have commissioner news, or do you want to respond to that?
I am going to be unavailable on October 11th. I will be somewhere between Chicago and Nashville for a work event. So I am off the books for that day due to work. Sometimes I do have a separate comment, which is just a general statement. I'm not responding to any letters or emails or anything specifically. Sometimes for the public, it feels like we're going through a motion here. And I can honestly assure you, this is painful to participate in as a public member of the public. There's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of reading. But we're not just going through the motions, we're following the law. And when you get one of those notices in your yard with a sign that says there's a project coming up next to your house, you should attend the public meeting, because that is the place where your voice will be heard. And I can hand over heart say, this commission, as I've been a member of it, listens to members of the public who participate in scheduled meetings. Stuff goes haywire when you don't show up. And if you're unhappy with the result and you weren't at the meeting, it's on you. Not on the city, not on some bureaucrat in California, on you for not paying attention to a sign that was posted in your yard, or a mailing you got from the city, or something that showed up in the newspaper. Be a citizen and stop blaming others, because there's a lot of that that's going on. I've seen many things happen on Nextdoor and other pieces of feedback I've got from members of the community. You know, I'm not here because I like it. I'm here because I love the city. And there's a process we need to go through to make the city a better place. And I hope that that's what we're doing here, is creating a process that's easy, accessible, and approachable from the public, but you got to do your part. So that's it.
Well said.
You've been reading Nextdoor again.
I'm afraid I have. So that's my rant. I'm done.
No, it's my rant every time I get on there. Is there any other comment, questions, concerns, or a motion to adjourn? We have a motion to adjourn from Commissioner.
Will we adjourn, please?
Yes. We need a second.
Second.
Okay. Vice Chair Hernandez.
Commissioner Gossett,
Yes.
Commissioner Reddick,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hernandez,
Aye.
and Chair Gorn.
Please.
You may adjourn.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
All take care.
Thank you.
Bye.